Welcome to Consider This Next on Civic Sci TV Radio. I'm your host, Kacie 𝐂𝐤𝐬. Here on the show, we connect with diverse voices across the civic science landscape. Scholars, practitioners, and leaders shaping the intersections of science within our society. Our mission? To uncover lessons from their work and translate them into actionable insights. Like all programs from the Civic Science Media Lab, whether on video, radio, or digital print, Consider This Next is here to keep decision makers, from researchers and practitioners to local community members, informed, inspired, and equipped with the latest insights. Today, we're speaking with Alex 𝐓𝐡𝐞, founder and editor of the Xylom, the only Asian American-focused science news outlet in the United States. From his early days as a college freshman in Atlanta to building a publication that bridges science, community, and culture, Alex brings us a unique perspective on what it means to communicate science in our increasingly complex world. Let's take a listen. So on the program today, we have Alex 𝐓𝐡𝐞, who just behind the scenes here at the Civic Science Media Lab, we have been admiring his work and the work of his organization for a little bit, but I'll actually have him tell you a little bit more about who he is and what it is that he does. So Alex, would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your publication?
Yes. Hi, my name is Alex. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast. I am joining the podcast from Atlanta, Georgia, where I've been living non-consecutively for 6 years. I originally was born and raised in Hong Kong, and I moved over to the US to study environmental engineering here in Atlanta at Georgia Tech. I quickly realized that a lot of the issues that we learn in class or that we have to deal with through internships, through capstone projects, they're less of a science problem or a technical problem. They're more of issues of money, of values, and policies. At the time when I first came to the US, this was before COVID, which meant Zoom wasn't a big thing yet. Virtual events weren't a big thing yet. A lot of the events that were held for science storytelling was mostly done in coastal cities, mostly catering to an English-speaking audience. And being a person that speaks Cantonese as a first language and English as a second language, I just wondered where I would find myself in this. I also wonder what people who look like me, who might be less fortunate to be in the spot where I was at, would find themselves in this. And so that prompted me to start the Xylom. We are the only Asian American run science news outlet in the United States. Our tagline is "We grow science with words" because we believe that there's a lot of impactful reporting we can do that can bring clarity to people, can bring accountability and justice. We can also highlight solutions that can help bring a better world. And these solutions, these accountability-based reporting, we try to be as evidence-based as possible. We live in a world where there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of unknowns, and there's a lot of misinformation. And what we're trying to do here is to bring a little clarity, as I mentioned, and also just to help folks navigate around this world where it feels like everything's going to change the next minute.
What year did the Xylom start?
Yeah, so the Xylom started in 2018. That was when I was a college freshman, and I wasn't quite sure what I was doing at the time. And that's okay. That's how it happens most of the time. I would say the reason why, or that way I started the Xylom, was I started blogging when I was in my senior year of high school. I noticed, okay, how does accessibility in the field of science journalism or science writing look like? I wasn't sure I wanted to do science writing at the time because, as I just mentioned, I went to study engineering. But I knew that I'm always interested in thinking about, talking about, and being a part of how scientific research interacts in the public space, and also the important things of how to build trust, how to build dialogue, and how to build towards action, that people can have actionable information that can make informed decisions with. I grew up in a very religious family, and I'm still religious. And so one thing that I was made aware when I was in high school was there's a big there's a big difference in the US between how different religious groups view contentious science issues. For example, about their views on climate change, or about their views on vaccinations, or about their views currently about transgender folks, about these issues. And I try to understand why religion plays such a big role in people's understanding of these issues, which when I grew up, it doesn't seem as polarized as they are in the US. And so that led me to understand that there's a good deal of reporting that needs to be done to understand why people think the way they do. So not just reporting on, oh, a new piece of research came out, or this university just got their funding pulled, or they just received new funding from a philanthropic funder, but to understand, okay, what are the impacts of science on people, on the broader society as a whole, on people who've traditionally been left out of the picture, left out of the equation, and also people who now have new access to scientific research, but they're not sure about what to do with this. And I think that's some of the guiding things that I thought about when I started Xylom. And we started off as an essay site. So we didn't do like news reporting, investigations, all that. So some of my colleagues, some of my friends, we started writing about reported essays. We wrote about first-person essays just about things that we might have personally experienced, or we just saw on the internet or happening to people around us that we felt like there's a science angle to this. Let's talk about it. And we gradually realized like there's a lot of places to do reporting simply because we don't know enough to form an opinion about things, or other folks might not know enough to form an opinion about things. And if we can't be informed to make informed opinions, then we have to do the work of informing folks as well. So that's how we approached it. It's like a living organism in a way. We just evolve it based on necessity, and also based on what our contributors can do, and also based on a part of my personal growth as I went through college and through grad school, and now I'm in the employment market, right? So that's how it works some of the time.
Is there a particular thesis or a particular sort of framework that the Xylom operates under? Are there like particular types of stories that you like to cover, or is it more about general science communication?
Yeah, so we love covering what we call science and society stories. So what we call about science and society stories it's figuring out three things, right? So the first thing is, how are people responding to changes in science? How do people who do the science look more like us? And how are people using science to respond to a changing world? So there's a difference, right? How do people react to changes in science? And how do people use science to respond to a changing world? So it's two sides of the same coin. And also about who does the science, who's in the room, who's not in the room. So I personally do a lot of reporting on what I call the environmental justice and the future of city speed, which means I love looking into environmental justice. But I also love to think about how cities work. I think of cities as a living organism by itself. There are parts that are metal, steel, it could be concrete, but then it's inhabited by people and people interact with one another. Or cities are places where research is done, or city are places that are testing sites for new ideas. So I think about that in a way. And environmental justice, that comes from my upbringing, right? I grew up in the global south, even though Hong Kong is a very wealthy city. And just understanding the challenges that other folks have been facing. And now I live in the American South, which Atlanta is home to the Centers for Disease Control, and it's the CDC. I can't remember the whole name of it, but it's where a lot of folks talk about health disparities, talk about environmental disparities. There's a lot of research that's going on, and I do a little part of that by participating in reporting that can help shed light on such disparities and figure out, okay, what do we do moving forward? So that's a lot of the stories that we do. The Xylom, we're really proud of trying to find a connection between the American South and the global South. I do think one thing I observed is a lot of the times what happens in the global South, it comes back to America. And usually the first signs we see something's happening is in the American South. And I think it's important to find these connections between the global South and the American South, especially in cities like Atlanta and Houston. There's just a huge growing Asian population as well. These are where Asian Americans are moving in. We are the fastest growing demographic in the United States. So trying to find connections and also understanding agency between these different groups, how America's actions might affect our home countries, how our home countries' actions might affect the US or even other unrelated countries and continents. That's always something that fascinates me, fascinates our reporters, and we try to report about it. We're more and more seeing the consequences in the States. For example, when the Trump administration cut a lot of US aid funding or cutting a lot of research funding into neglected tropical diseases, hypothetically. And now you get to have reporters who are in Africa who write for us trying to figure out, okay, what are the on-the-ground impacts of this? It helps put a human face to an issue that is usually quantified in the millions of dollars or how many zeros are there on a check. Some of the other stories that we really love to do are stories that look into Asian Americans in the science field. One reported essay that our contributors worked on a few years back was, I learned so much from it. It talks about how in California, there's been an issue of how Indian Americans are struggling with the caste system. So the caste system, it sorts people based on different classes, and certain classes have fewer rights than other folks that are in higher classes. And we see some of these patterns playing out in the Indian American tech industry because a lot of them emigrate from India to the US and they try to reinstitute the same system in the US, which is not legal, just to make sure everybody knows. And these are some issues that mainstream media has trouble reporting about because they are not staffed with Asian Americans or they do not have the capacity to report in, for example, the languages that these folks speak. So one thing that we always prioritize is when we report on any issue, we try to make sure that the people who are being reported about can access the information about how they've been reported. So we also do a lot of work in getting bilingual or trilingual freelance journalists and translators to get the stories available in multiple languages so that people can access it. I think it reflects our priority of fairness and transparency, that it is only fair that people being covered can take action based on what we've been reported about, not just our American readers or our readers who have a good grasp of the English language. So these are some of the things that I think that sets us apart. And it's been a challenge in 2025, and we're still figuring out how to continue to do this public service journalism and trying to also stay strong to our values and do the work that's necessary.
So I'd love to talk about that. You started this initiative your freshman year of college when a lot of students are just trying to figure out what college is all about. And here you are, you're starting a whole journalism publication. And so I'd love to know, like, how did you go about growing and scaling and finding freelance journalists? How do you fit the operation of the Xylom within the context of the rest of your life?
Yeah, so in the past, I was a volunteer editor of the Xylom. Even though I founded it, I was very lucky that I was part of the Georgia Tech Ray C. Anderson Foundation Scheller Sustainability Ambassadors Program. It's a very long name. It is based at the business school of Georgia Tech, which meant I benefited from a lot of coaching, a lot of tips on what a business plan is, or how do you present a case of why, the Xylom is filling a niche. We weren't actually figuring that out at that point. I was going through the motions. It was COVID at the time, but it was only until late 2023 when a report came out from the City University of New York and Newmark J School's Center for Community Media, again, a very long name, that basically confirms that we are the only Asian American science news outlet in the US. I guess my hunch was correct all along, that we were filling a niche, but I never quite knew how to articulate the niche. So while I was a full-time student, I just spent time treating the Xylom as a project and getting stories out and learning through classes and opportunities provided by my school to figure out like, why could this be a career? Or could this be something that can be something I wanted to do long term? Is this viable? So I think that benefited from it. I do strongly believe that a lot of science, that you don't necessarily have to turn a profit with science. There's inherent value in doing basic science research. I want to be very clear about this. But I think all scientists should be mentally prepared to talk to people about why their work is important and help people understand why their work is important. Because if you can't do real life impact with the science, it really diminishes the work that you do. And I think that's really important to recognize. And so in this case, as a reporter, we do commission essays sometimes, we do commission opinion pieces sometimes, but also just learning to speak the languages of scientists and also learning to meet our audience where they're at to help them thread the needle about, okay, why is this important? Why is this not important? And so my time spent at MIT and Georgia Tech has been really helpful because I'm surrounded by engineers, I'm surrounded by researchers, scientists of all kinds, that I try to understand how can I convey what's important about their work in a language that's easily understandable by hypothetically a ninth grader. I think that's something that I think about a lot. I think another thing that's also really important is the Xylom started as a passion project. Apparently, we've been doing some good work in getting a fiscal sponsor, getting good donations, getting readers to support our work, getting major donors in, getting subscribers. And I think that's important that the more we try to do this good work, or more we think about how to do this kind of work, we see that people are hopping on the bandwagon, or people are showing that they care about the work that we do and they want to support us doing this work on the long term. That was one of the motivating factors. Once I graduated, I was like, okay, this can be a full-time job, not just something that I run as a blog or an essay site on the side while I do like other kinds of work, pushing paper at a consultancy or something like that. I'm very fortunate to have a lot of science journalists, a lot of researchers who are very skilled in communicating with the public to give me advice, to give me support, or to just validate the work I've been doing. Some of the names I'll throw out right now: Dr. 𝐂𝐞 𝐗𝐲𝐬, she's currently at Brown University, but she was at Georgia Tech. She was leading the global change program at the time. She was somebody I looked up to. She did really great work. Dr. Emily Weigel, who's still currently at Georgia Tech, she taught my freshman biology class, and she taught me to think about how climate change is affecting urban areas through a course that it was an elective. She gave me a lot of the background from a scientific standpoint of understanding why reporting on cities is so important if we want to fully understand the impacts of climate change. And there's also Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐗𝐲𝐿. She is the boss of my first internship. She works at the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, and she's currently also a professor at Spelman College. Shout out our HBCUs. She helped me understand the historical reasons why there are health disparities in the US. I think as a reporter, I need to understand the history of why things happen so we can explain to readers how we got to here and where can we go from here. I think that was so important that she filled me in with the details to help this make sense. And the final person that I think that really made a difference was Dr. 𝐂𝐤 𝐗𝐲𝐬. She is currently the chief scientist of the Nature Conservancy, and she is also based in Lubbock, Texas, at Texas Tech University. She studies into the concept of cultural Christianity, which means that Christians who self-identify as Christians, but they don't necessarily go to church, they don't necessarily read the Bible, they don't necessarily think about what am I doing? Is it biblical, for example? So how do these folks view climate change differently from folks who regularly attend church or regularly serve with church-related nonprofits? And how do you get to these folks and speak to their values, or understanding how their values inform how they vote or certain beliefs and decisions? I think that's something that, as a person of faith, that's so important to see this important research going on. She's been writing books. She's amazing. And understanding that there's a need for all kinds of science writers, science journalists, science communicators, simply because there's so many different groups of people out there that we want to meet audiences where they're at. And I accept that there are some audiences where we don't have a lot in common. I just can't reach them, but I can help other journalists and other science writers do that job and close that gap. And the Xylom is one of the places where we can make this happen. I think I learned a lot from other folks, and now I'm just trying to do this job well and hope that other people also share this belief in our mission and they will love to join arms, lock arms, and do this work together so we can have a bigger impact.
With the changing landscape of journalism in general, you mentioned like mainstream media. Who knows what mainstream media is going to be in the next 3 to 5 years? Do you see your role and your work with the Xylom as an indie publication, a very niche publication, being a strength? Or I guess to phrase the question differently, what opportunities do you see moving forward into the next 3 to 5 years for the particular angle that the Xylom brings to science communication?
Yeah. So I want to first impress you on a stat that I found out just this week. As of 2024, America has fewer journalists than coal miners. This is an official statistic from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that they released a couple weeks ago. So what we're looking at right here is we've been talking a lot about a clean and just transition, right? That's a lot of what we report about in the climate journalism beat. And lo and behold, it seems like journalism is the actual shrinking industry right here. So what we're looking at is that there are a lot of reporting gaps that are left to be filled. We do recognize that the current presidential administration is having an unprecedented assault towards democracy, towards free speech, towards the right to a free press, towards basic scientific research that is apolitical, and also towards the basic rights of minorities to be treated with human dignity. I am not afraid to say that because that is something that we're experiencing on a daily basis, and we should call out such things as they happen. Which also means that the Xylom were uniquely equipped to meet the moment. Because we've been covering science and society, we've been covering Asian Americans, and we have staff in the global South, both in the form of photojournalists or freelancers, data journalists, that we're able to see this issue from a different angle. Me and certain colleagues of mine, we lived through democratic decline. We lived in autocracies before moving over to the US and doing this work. We understand the stakes involved, and we are determined, one, not to make the same mistakes we did when we were living in our home countries, but also we see through similar tactics when they are used in an American context. So we strive for fair and accurate reporting that underlines the stakes and the consequences of such actions. And we try to be very careful about reporting about potential greenwashing or potential spread of disinformation through official channels or through mass media, as it's been happening for a while now. And I do think what we are capable of is because of our lived experiences and because of all the science degrees that a lot of our reporters do bring, we are able to explain complex concepts to people in a way that they understand and they can relate to. That's one that really important thing. The second thing is we look like the communities we cover, which means that we can shed light on issues that have been left out of the equation for a long time in a culturally competent way, in a culturally sensitive way. I think that's really important. When we showcase the stakes of what's involved, it's important to have a human face on what's going on. I also think it's important that we've been doing a lot of accountability reporting, and I now live in Atlanta, and I know you're from the Atlanta area as well. There's so much going on. There's not a lack of stories to report on and dig into. I've always had the strong belief that if a lot of journalists are always focusing on the same issue or the same person or the same political figure, then it means we're not doing a good job, because that means there's so many stories we're leaving at the chopping board. That's not okay. And by complicating the narrative through reporting about what's really happening, both in terms of what's not going well and also fairly about what people are trying to do to make a difference in terms of scientific innovation, by implementing policy solutions, by implementing new ways of engagement, just like how the civic science Media Lab is doing right now. And it enables people to have a better sense of reality. I do think social media and conventional forms of media, both digital or TV or cable, sometimes people watch a lot of it, they feel a lot of despair, or they feel like, oh, it doesn't reflect the reality that I'm living in. And this skewed sense of reality sometimes makes people take irrational decisions. And we want to make sure that our reporting is grounded in evidence-based solutions and also grounded in reality, so people can have a good sense of where we are, how we get here, and what do we do, where do we go from here. And I think that's a really important job that we as journalists do. And I think we're ready to meet the moment. I really think we are, and we can cover things that many news outlets can. And we're also really eager to collaborate with a lot of news outlets. The Xylom recently joined a climate news task force comprised of 10 other climate news outlets that they just do amazing work. They win the Pulitzers, they get the money. And we're just thinking about how can we collaborate? There are so many stories that we can't just do it alone. For example, a reporter from Detroit might not have somebody who speaks Chinese on their staff, or I don't have a car. I can't just go to New Orleans and go figure out what's going on in this particular town and this particular time. But then the EPA Region 4 is based in Atlanta, which means, for example, what happens in other states, it goes to Atlanta, the information goes there, the decisions are made there, and there are different EPA regions across the US. Maybe Louisiana belongs to another region, but the similar playbook is being played out. So it's only by collaboration that you can have a fuller sense of what's actually going on. And that's where I think we can really step up and do this work, because we've been used to connecting different groups of people, different cultures, and different scientific ideas to report on stories that really matter.
Well, I think this has been incredibly fascinating from the perspective of starting an independent publication to figuring out a business model. You've shouted out some of the mentors and folks who've helped to shape the direction of the publication, the work that you're doing, the collaborations. I think this is an incredibly inspiring story for anyone who's listening and thinking like, I don't know if I could start a whole publication. I don't know. I think just the way that you've described how this process has started to where it is now is something that hopefully our listeners can take away. If someone is, I too have a particular angle, or I think that I have a perspective on covering a news story that's in my community. This was really insightful. And so I would love if people want to follow you or learn more about how they can support you, what would be the best ways for them to do that?
Yes, my parting thought is don't do this alone. We're not built to do this alone. I did start the Xylom by myself, which I do not recommend, but we can only get to where we are right now because we have colleagues that believe in us. So I want to make sure that people know that when you have an idea, think about how you can work as a team, or how you find your circle to do this work that's important. That's even more vital in times like these. I would say, but you can follow us at the Xylom, and we're on Instagram, we're on Blue Sky, we are on Mastodon if you're into that, we're on LinkedIn if you're more of a professional go-getter type, and we're also on our website at thexylom.com, and you can feel free to subscribe to our free newsletter so you have more updates about what's happening behind the scenes or things that we're reporting about. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Alex, thank you so much for coming on Consider This Next today.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
Now that we've heard from Alex about building the Xylom and the future of science journalism, when it comes to creating new platforms for science communication, consider this next. How might creating bridges between different communities enhance the way we communicate about science? As Alex mentioned, connecting the American South with the global South reveals patterns and impacts that might otherwise go unnoticed. What role does multilingual reporting play in ensuring equity in science communication? The Xylom's commitment to providing content in multiple languages shows how accessible reporting can empower the communities being covered to take action based on what's being reported about them. How can collaborative journalism address critical reporting gaps in science coverage? In a time when America has fewer journalists than coal miners, Alex's emphasis on building partnerships and joining task forces reveals how cooperation can fill essential knowledge voids. And finally, are we considering the human face behind complex scientific issues? By focusing on how people use science to respond to a changing world and how that world changes in response to science, we create more meaningful connections with our audiences. Before we sign off, I'd like to offer a big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in and engaging with these crucial topics. If you found value in this podcast, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us continue to bring you insightful conversations like this one. Until next time, keep nurturing your curiosity and stay connected to the science all around you. This is Kacie 𝐓𝐻𝐿 signing off from Consider This Next on Civic Sci TV Radio. Stay curious.